Okay, so I'll go ahead and jump in. And as I mentioned, we'll have questions. And we are a small enough group, so if something's burning as I'm going through it, so feel free to raise your hand, and I'll happily take your comments. Real quickly, I just want to give you an overview of what DGRI is and kind of what we do. And so we operate within the downtown area, and downtown for us has a specific boundary, and what you see up here on the screen. So for reference point, this is Wealthy on the south. This would be the railroad tracks. The western boundary here is Seward. This is Lafayette. So we have our boundary to the east kind of jogs outside of Heritage Hill to stay outside of the historic district. And then up on the north, this is Leonard Street. So actually just up this way, and then this would be Front on the side. And then we come down Division here, staying outside of the Belknap Hill. So that's kind of the area that we operate in. And our kind of main goal and priority is kind of place management and just city building related initiatives. So we do a number of different things. Clean and safe is kind of our bread and butter. So making sure that the streets are swept, that the flowers have plants in them, and that things are generally looking nice. We have our our ambassador team. So this is a contract that we started back in 2013. Make sure that the streets are welcoming, and that if people are out and about downtown, that they kind of know where they're going. If they're lost for whatever reason, they can talk to a friendly face and get to where they need to. We also help to produce events, so we do our Movies in the Park is kind of our signature series, but we're also moving into quite a bit more of winter-related events. So we just helped with the Light Up Downtown event last Friday. We're moving into in February. We do what we're kind of calling our World of Winter, which is a kind of 9-day winter celebration where there's ice carving, and there's a number of events really designed to help people come out and get outside even in the depths of winter. And then the organization was really started to help to implement the Downtown Development Authority and their tools. And so the primary tool that the DDA uses is kind of reimbursement for large-scale development projects. So over the years, the DDA has helped to fund, the signature downtown projects. We call it kind of the silver bullets. So the arena, the downtown market, the convention center. The first one would be the Amway Grand Plaza Hotel, and then we also participate in just about every project that's happening now. So all the cranes you see up, we typically have some form of participation in those projects, and that is usually in the form of a tax increment reimbursement agreement that we put in place. And I won't bore you too much with public finance, but essentially what this allows us to do is, as new development comes on, we use the increase in property tax value to reimburse the developer for some of their eligible activities. And that's really what the Downtown Development Authority statute is set up to do. So just kind of a crude graph to show you what that looks like. So kind of this is the base year when a new project is done. This is the increment value that's created. We capture that, and then for certain projects, we provide a reimbursement of up to 75%, so that really in the effort to spur more development and catalytic projects. This is an example of one that we worked on for Bridgewater condominiums, or River House condominiums, where over the life of the agreement, the developer was reimbursed about $2.1 million. At the end of that agreement, we then capture all of the increment that we can then use to do new projects in downtown. So that's kind of one of the main tools that we utilize. There are two tax increment finance districts within downtown. One is the DDA area, which is kind of the core of downtown, and then the other is the Monroe North Tax Increment Finance Authority, and that's really this neighborhood that we're in right now. For all intents and purposes, for the public, those lines don't really matter. These are just kind of sources of our revenues. Our other primary source of funding is an improvement district. So Downtown Improvement District is an assessment that building owners opt to pay into to get certain services in return. So that's really where our money comes from. A quick note on some of the things that are happening, and I'm assuming for most of you none of this is new. There's a lot of activity happening in downtown right now. On a map, this is what it looks like. Yellow would be all projects that are under construction. Blue are things that are planned or in the pipeline. And I have a couple profiles of some of those projects. That didn't show up perfectly, but really what this is telling us is there's about $500 million or $500 million of investment happening right now under construction. If a few large projects that are planned happen, that number starts to bump up closer to $750 million. So no shortage of activity. Primary uses for those projects, so a lot of hotel has been coming online. Some of that has to do with financing and kind of the appetite for banks to lend. Obviously, the Monroe Hotel just down the road here, that's something that's been on the books for a while that has kind of broken loose that we're excited to see. Certainly a lot of housing and residential units coming online. Another trend that we're excited to see as we kind of think about growing a downtown neighborhood. And then you kind of see the breakdown of some of the other uses. The important number that's kind of cut off here, and something that I'll talk a little bit more about later and that we talk a great deal about, is parking. Because one of the things we always hear about is, where is everyone going to park? What's happening with parking? Of all of these projects, there are about 3,400 new spaces being added. On a net basis, because some of those projects are happening on surface parking lots, on a net basis, that's about 1,800 spots. So about 2 pretty large parking ramps if you're looking at an average. So again, here just a couple profiles of some of those projects. This is the Warner Tower Hyatt Place right downtown off of Pearl and Ottawa, or between Ottawa and Ionia. This is actually my office right here. So I have the benefit of a front door, front window to all of the construction happening right there. It's pretty remarkable to see. It's going up very quickly, slated for completion late 2019. Again, we helped to provide some money for that project through our development support program. And as with most projects downtown, there's a brownfield and some state support. So there's typically a lot of layering that goes into making these developments happen. Studio C, so this is the movie theater project. I'm sure a lot of you heard about that when it was approved back in the spring. Still some work to be done to close on the property, but all things are moving along, and that's looking for a groundbreaking in early 2018. Certainly an exciting project with new entertainment amenities, new parking as well, and then also a number of residential units, hotel, as well as commercial space. And then the last one, which this is actually just outside of our district on the map. This is right here, so just outside of our boundary line, but nonetheless a project we're very excited about, which is the Meyer Bridge Street Market. It also has an element of affordable housing, elements of office. It can be a WIMCAT is going to move there, and so kind of a project that is ticking a lot of boxes in terms of our priorities that we're very excited to see for. So when I moved here from California about 5 years ago, the number one thing that we heard about is, when are we going to get a major grocer in downtown? That's one of the main desires of residents, and so having this come online in the downtown neighborhood we see as a huge win. So that's kind of where we are and kind of what's happening, and so the remainder of the presentation I want to talk about kind of where we want to go and some of the priorities that we have going forward. A lot of you have probably seen this presentation. So this is GR Forward. This is our master plan that was developed for downtown in the River Corridor. This is something we worked on collaboratively with the city starting in about 2014. It was approved as an amendment to the city's master plan in December 2015. And our work at this point at DGRI is really focused on implementing this plan and making sure that everything that we heard from the community, that we're aligning our resources to go towards that. So just to, we did a tremendous amount of outreach over those 2 years to make sure that everyone's voice was heard. And through that, we kind of created these 6 goals that we're kind of, again, that we're focused on. I'm going to focus on the first 4, but we'll point out that this programming and public space activation is also really core to what we do. Not only making sure that we have spaces for residents and visitors in downtown to go and use and enjoy in an urban environment, but then making sure that there are interesting and exciting things happening there. So when we talk about moves in the parks and some of the other events that we do, that's really kind of core and central to that goal 5. No surprise that one of the primary things that we see in the future for driving development is the river. So the Grand River Revitalization Project that is still moving along is something that we see as having a potentially huge catalytic impact on downtown development. And so we do a lot of work in coordinating with that Grand Rapids Whitewater project. And our focus and the city's focus is really on making sure that what's happening on the edges of the river is really taking full advantage of what's going to be happening in the water itself. And so a lot of what was done in GR Forward and work that's continuing now with some river design guideline development is looking at making sure there are key access points for kind of those major events in the river. So when we think about the rapids and where those are going to be, we want to make sure that people have an opportunity to sit there and watch what's happening, and if they're not brave enough to get in the water. And then if they are in the water, if they need to get out at a certain point, we want to make sure, if there's an emergency or something, that they can exit the water safely. And then in addition, thinking about what are some of the development spaces along the river that makes sense for commercial uses. So if there's likely going to be a high demand for people wanting to rent watercrafts, for people wanting to sit by the water and watch what's going on, and so we want to kind of balance all of those things as the river project moves forward. And a lot of that has to do with kind of reimagining infrastructure. So for a number of years, this was kind of how we thought about flood protection and management. And as you all know, that this isn't a great environment to go see the river. In fact, if you're standing right here, you can't actually see the river. And so we want to think about ways to open that up and think creatively about adding in conditions like this. This is certainly not going to work everywhere along the river's edge, but there are certain key spots where we think we can start to introduce these elements. And that this, as you can see, would provide tremendous amount of access, interest, and we think induce demand. Another piece of that with the infrastructure element is then thinking about trails and open spaces, and so this connected river trail is a huge focus both for the city as well as DGRI. So we have some trail spaces already built out. Really what we're trying to do is connect them to make sure that there's kind of a continuous loop that can be accessed. This project is actually just outside the window here across Monroe. It was kind of slated as a demonstration project where you can see the wall being peeled back here, kind of a trail going down to the water's edge, and really just kind of softening the what was once a flood wall. And so we're trying to introduce elements of this throughout the river corridor. It is, as you can imagine, a pretty massive undertaking when you think about all the property owners along the river and getting easements and those types of things. Also, realigning flood infrastructure is not cheap, and you need to make sure that you're still providing the flood protection. And so there's a lot of work that goes into introducing these elements, but the city, as well as DGR, is really dedicated to doing that, and we certainly are seeing a lot of cooperation from property owners along the river who I think also are starting to see the opportunities and benefits that a restored river can provide. Another piece on that trail element is that we think it'll start to connect these major opportunity sites along the river's edge. We identified about 28 through GR Forward, which is a lot. I can tell you in kind of a phase 1 approach, we're looking at about 5 of these to kick things off, and we're hopeful that some of those will start to move forward pretty quickly. One of those, which is a little farther down the line, probably more of a phase 2, is this 201 market site. So this is city-owned property. This would be 131 Market Avenue. Founders right there is always a good landmark. So this is city-owned property, mainly used right now. There's some office space there, but there's also some facilities and storage. And so the city is exploring opportunities for development. There was a RFQ that went out, and there's conversations going on with the developer that put forth a proposal that kind of met a lot of the city's goals. And so conversations are continuing to happen about that space. That's an example of one area along the river where we hope to see some development in the future. And then the last piece on the river is just we want to think about it not just from a north-south perspective, but also east-west. We think these kind of primary streets here, there are only 6 or so streets that actually cross from east to west over the river. We think the river can be a huge kind of congregating meeting point for people throughout the city. And so we want to make sure there are strong connections into the neighborhoods citywide. Some of the other kind of development areas that we see in downtown, again, this will be no surprise for most of you. The west side and Bridge Street is a huge kind of growth area at the moment. A lot of work has already been filled in here since this plan was done 2 years ago. The other kind of major areas for growth are the surface parking lots, so areas 7, 8, and 9. Those are DDA-owned properties. And so we did a little bit of imagining about what those spaces could grow into in the future. No current plans for disposition of those properties, but we do think that kind of as things continue to grow, that this will be, eventually those sites will be development sites. That's what they were acquired for. As things grow, we'll certainly look at what projects will help us to meet our goals. And so That's one area. Another, of course, would be this area to the east of Division, so kind of over in that Mary Free Bed, that kind of hospital area where there's a lot of institutional use, but there is also a lot of surface parking where we see some opportunities for infill development. And so those are also properties that we hear a lot about and people are looking at for development. The other one that we don't have a slide up here for, but it's kind of already taken off, is the Monroe North area, so where we are right now, where new residential coming online, new hotel. Across the river, just over here, there's some new housing development happening. And so basically, as you can see, most of downtown has some opportunities for growth. We don't have a lot of clean sites, so those surface parking lots are some of the few remaining once area 4 and 5 are developed. And so a lot of it is infill related development that we think we'll be seeing in the near term. And I'll point out kind of the way we look at development. Obviously, it's good for the city from an income tax perspective. We look at it in that lens, of course, but then also thinking about how do we create a neighborhood in downtown. So one of the things that we heard in our outreach for GR Forward was that people wanted to kind of have a 7-day-a-week district neighborhood that they could come down to at any time and kind of get a real neighborhood feel. And so for the most part, things are kind of scattered in downtown right now, particularly around residential population. And so we're trying to, with some of this infill growth, to kind of create connections in between those activity districts. And that we think will help to support a lot of the things that people tell us they want to see around amenities. I mentioned the grocery store earlier, but other things that residents and visitors are hoping to see. So we did a little bit of a build-out analysis, and through the plan, we kind of established a goal of getting to 12,000 residents in downtown. We're a little over 5,000 right now, approaching 6 with some of the new development that's happening. So we're continuing to look to grow the residential population in downtown, really to kind of get to this kind of income density that we talk about, which is kind of how we frame wanting to make sure that the amenities that people want to see are provided for. And when we talk to retailers, a lot of what their hesitation is for further investment has to do with the amount of people and the amount of income density in downtown. So that's kind of how we think about growth and development. On the flip side of that, we also want to make sure that we're maintaining affordability, and so that's kind of the balance that we're always working through, is that we want to make sure that downtown stays affordable, particularly for people that are already here. And so through the plan, what we established was maintaining the split of income restricted and market housing. At the time, it was 30%, and so we set that goal of maintaining that going forward with the growth and development. And so if we get to our kind of 12,000 residential population number, around 10,000 units, we'd be adding a little over 2,000 affordable or income restricted housing units. And so, yeah. Yeah. No. We're hoping to, it would generally push us kind of up into this level. And it kind of depends on the acreage where you are, where you're drawing those lines about what you need, and so it's not kind of a blanket approach for each development. Some areas, particularly in the Hartside area, have a lot of affordable housing at the moment, and so if we can find ways to get mixed income in there, so more market rate units, and then in the areas where there's not affordable housing in the downtown neighborhoods, then we'd want to look to include those. So it's a more nuanced approach than just kind of a blanket statement about what we need, but in terms of income density, no, we use this exercise as a way to just demonstrate that we need mixed income development in downtown. It was kind of at the point where you hear a lot about affordable housing, which we know is important, but we also need to keep an eye on that income density piece to make sure that there's the spending power to support all the things that people tell us they want. Yeah, and I'm happy to, I don't know if this will be online afterward, but I'm happy to send this presentation out so you can all take a further look at it. Good question, though. Goal 3 here is about transportation and mobility, so this kind of ties back into our parking discussion. And the way that we talk about transportation and mobility, and I'll just kind of underline this, we are not anti-car, which is something we get accused of a lot. We think about kind of a transportation system. And within that kind of network system, we want to prioritize pedestrians. So whoever comes downtown, however they get there, they're going to be a pedestrian at some point. And so we want to make sure that the pedestrian experience is safe and wherever possible that it's interesting to hopefully drive people to walk a little bit more. I know it's a funny way to say that, to drive people to walk more, but nonetheless, that's kind of really our focus. And so looking at areas to add in medians, add in colored crosswalks eventually. I know the traffic engineer department doesn't like that, but we think the city commission is continuing to push for that. But all these things we think help make downtown more walkable, and so we're really interested in doing that. And then in addition, just trying to continue to look at what's the data telling us in terms of what our mode shift or our mode splits are right now. This is a little dated again, so this is around 2015, but at that time, the amount of people working in downtown, 94% drove. And I wouldn't expect that number is going to change dramatically. We do live in a car-dominated culture, but if we could even shift this kind of 6% who are using alternative means to maybe get to 10%, that opens up a significant amount of parking. It helps to alleviate some of the congestion, and it would just help things dramatically in terms of investments that need to be made to add more parking. The parking structures that are built cost $15, $20, $30 million, sometimes in the range of $30,000 a space, and so we want to be thinking very thoughtfully as a city about how we're investing in those infrastructure and those assets, because it's not cheap. And if you read on some of that autonomous car literature that's out there and some of the trends about where driving is going, those are investments that may not return the value that the city is looking for. And so we just want to be thoughtful about that and hopefully find ways to provide opportunities for people to make different decisions if they're up to it. So Mobile GR department is finishing up a bike share feasibility study this month. It'll actually be reported to the city commission next month. There's a lot of interest in bringing a car share operator into town. I had a meeting with a developer yesterday that's interested in exploring that, and so just continuing to think about alternatives to kind of the single occupancy vehicle, and again making sure that the infrastructure responds to that, so that on streets, this is Fulton Avenue looking east, what are some opportunities that maybe add in bike lanes to soften kind of that harsh landscape, so that people are more willing to take alternative means of transportation. This picture always freaks people out. I'll tell you that the concept here was that the on-street parking is something that would be on during the day. Maybe when an event is happening, then that clears out so that cars can still drive out, which makes sense. I mean, if there's an event at the arena, you have 20,000 people that need to leave, and so being flexible, but also pushing people to think a little bit differently. The Dash system has also been a huge focus of conversations recently. Does everyone know what the Dash is, or everyone taken it? I actually took it up here today from my office, but this is the downtown circulator that both the city and the DDA help pay for. The great thing about this is that we can always change the routes as we need to. And so as development grows, as activity centers change, we can play around with the routes and really just kind of use this as a way for people to move about during their day in downtown. So this route is actually, these are a little dated from 2016. The routes have already been amended a little bit to capture some of the new activity areas. But there are also some investments that we're hoping to make to help up the frequency a little bit more. Right now on the north line, it runs every 10 minutes or so, which is actually a huge improvement from what it was a year ago. It was 20 minutes. And then on the west line, it's every 7 minutes or so, which is kind of the magic number where you can step out. You don't really have to watch the time too closely, and you can step out and reliably think that a bus will be there in 5 minutes or so. There's a lot of work going on this system right now in terms of a rebranding, so thinking about how we can make it more noticeable, and also letting people know where it goes. That's kind of the number one thing that we hear is, I don't know where it goes or when it's going to come, and so why would I kind of build my day around it? So Mobile GR is doing a lot of work around that, and then we're also going to do some looking at some more permanent infrastructure, just from infrastructure consolidation with the other fixed line routes in downtown. So combining the stops together so that we can have shelter and things like that, so that if it's raining, people are more apt to actually use the service. And then parking, the last one, you know, eventually we're going to have to, likely going to have to build some more parking in downtown. We just want to make sure that we're doing it in an area where it's going to be most used, that'll kind of provide the most benefit. So we are continuing to monitor, particularly as new development's happening, you know, how many spaces are online, what's the occupancy of the ramps, and then also looking at ways to tweak some of the pricing so that we're using kind of the economics and decision making of the consumers to kind of drive where people are going. And so Mobile GR is doing some great work around parking and kind of where new investments are going to be made. And then we're also frequently in conversations with developers about making sure that if a ramp is built, that it's not just kind of a standalone structure, but are there ways that we can incorporate it into a larger development.